welcome to everybody that's made it here today. I have Liz Cole, Senior UX Designer, here with us. And with her valuable experience, she's going to share with us what UX means to different companies and her experience. So I want to hand this over to Liz. And thanks, Liz, for joining us.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me and thanks for putting this together. Yeah, so a little bit about me, so you know why I have a right to be talking about any of this stuff. I've been a designer for a little over 6 years. I have mainly worked in the startup, smaller company realm. I have been usually the sole designer at every company that I've been at. So I have a lot of experience from anything that has to do with UX, UI, user research, all that good stuff, as you usually are forced to do when you're in a smaller company, which is great. You get a lot of experience and a crash course in that, which is fun. I am going to talk a little bit about UX within the company and what that looks like. How do you know companies that value UX and how you should be presenting things to stakeholders and what that looks like. And I would also like to save time. I know there were some people who submitted some questions, and I would just like to save time at the end for just a open forum Q&A that we can talk back and forth on, which I think is always the most fun. So let's get started. So when we're going to go off of, there's two things to know or to think about when you are trying to present things to stakeholders. And stakeholders are going to be people that are higher up in the company who are like you've done all the work and you're presenting this design to them that you've probably worked on with the team and the developers and your project manager and all that, and you're taking this design to them and saying, like, for the final approval kind of thing. And what you're gonna want to think about, especially in the beginning, is it's not about you as a personal designer. So the two things that it's really about are the users and the company. So when you are presenting, sorry, I'm using a hotspot and my husband's phone is the hotspot. When you are presenting, you want to be able to defend and say who the users are and how they benefit from them. And like, can you show that their best interests are being represented in that design? These are really important things that you need to be able to showcase, because this is what is going to overall make the company money, which honestly, at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? The company wants to know that they are going to be making some money from your designs, and it is going to benefit the overall bottom line of the company. And you as a UX designer have to always balance those things in the back of your mind, right? The company's needs along with the user's needs. And you want to make sure that all the designs that you're bringing bring value to the user. And you may know that, you may, without any research done, you could say, I know that a user is totally going to get value from a global search in this product. But taking that to a stakeholder and saying, I know this, and then they go, how do you know this? And you just go, because I just know, isn't going to cut it. You need to have research to back it up, have user interviews to back it up. And remember and again, what is kind of fun with the whole research thing and user personas is you can user persona your stakeholders, right? So you know who you are presenting to. What are they going to like? They're going to like graphs. They're going to like numbers. They're going to like presentations, because that's the world that they live in. So you're going to want to be able to provide those hard facts and those hard numbers and present it all nice and pretty in a package for them to easily understand. always remember that, and always remember to back up anything that you want to do with the users and your designs with hard facts and data. Either you're doing the research or you're working with a user researcher um, beforehand to be able to get everything in front of them. And the other thing to remember when it's not about you, so it's about the users and the company. So the company, is your design in line with the company goals and vision, right? So if you are bringing something up that isn't in line with the company goals and vision, you better make sure that you have tons of data to back up why you're asking the company to pivot. And if you don't have anything as to why you're asking the company to pivot, you might consider, why are we doing this in the first place? Um, the company is always going to be looking at the effort to reward ratio. So is it a high effort, high reward? Then they're probably going to consider it, but they might put it on the back burner because that means that the developers, if it's high effort, it doesn't just mean high effort for UX, right? That's going to mean high effort for the developers and possibly marketing and possibly sales. Because if you're revamping and creating a whole new thing, you can't just release it one day and expect the users to know how to use it. So you're going to be involving multiple different people inside the company, not just UX. So the higher the effort, the higher the reward needs to be for you to be able to validate like the need for it. And things that you're always going to want to sneak in are things that are high reward and low effort, because people love those things, and it usually gets you some easy wins, right? Um, like we are going to add form validation to a form, which there's a lot of plugins for that. So that for coding wise and development wise, it's not that big of a overhaul, but it's a huge win because it's going to let people who hate, nobody likes forms, it's going to be making the forms way easier to use. Um, so just try and think about those things on highlighting what's that effort to reward ratio. And another thing that I have found to work pretty well is, let's say you come up with this grand plan, it's a high effort, but it's also high reward. And they say, we just don't have time for that now. Be prepared to say, I totally understand. This is what I would like to do. Here's a phase one, here's a phase two, and here's a phase three. This one, it just shows initiative on your part that you understand the company goals and that there's other things that are happening. But two, it allows the work to continue going, because a lot of times they'll see this huge project and they'll just be like, we can't stop everything for this, right? But if you can phase out the work and have it all laid out, then there's like see that phase one and they're like, oh, well, we can totally do this phase one. And then it leads that, it gets the ball rolling. And once they get the ball rolling and they see positive benefits of this new design that's come out um, firsthand, and they start to see maybe users go up or user time on their platform go up, positive feedback from the customers, things like that. Usually it allows an easier segue into the phase two and the phase three, as well as it doesn't suck all the development time away, which is another really big thing to always be mindful of. And this is all, again, in on a within a company that really values UX. So all of these things that I'm saying for a company maybe who UX is kind of new for them or they haven't quite seen the value of, all these things stand true. It just means that you're going to have to advocate for them even more. You need to have your facts. You need to be in a teacher mindset and not so much of a defensive mindset, which is just part of being in UX is very much thinking of teaching people why you're making the decisions that you're making. UX is very logical. Like there's a reason behind everything that we do. And if you can explain that reason and know that reason well enough to present it to people, then you usually have, I have found pretty good success with that. I've rarely said, here's the very logical reason behind XYZ. Anybody come back and be like, well, I just don't want to do it that way. It's happened once or twice. And then you're just kind of like, okay, whatever. At the end of the day, you're not the boss. And if you are the boss, then you get to do all the right stuff, which is great. But so it's just knowing your stuff and advocating is a huge part of UX. Really, no matter what company you're at, even if they love UX, there's always something new to learn, and people are always wanting to learn about it. If it's a good company, so you just got to be able to be in the know and be able to educate people. Um, so that's the kind of the first thing. Remember, it's not about you; it's about all these other people that you're trying to bring together um, and provide communication with. And the second thing that you should just always, always do is you never want to bring your design to the stakeholders, like a high fidelity, completely done design, and that be the first time that they've seen it. You should always have their input from the very beginning. You should never start a project without stakeholders saying, yes, we want to do this. Which you're probably going to be working with a project manager or are working with a project manager or product manager, and they should be in contact with the stakeholders. If it's a smaller company, then you probably are as well. Um, but you want to bring them in on the ground floor when you're brainstorming this idea or trying to revamp something. If it's something that's big enough that's going to need a stakeholder approval, you're going to want that stakeholder's opinion in the very beginning. um, it is going to save so much headache and pain down the road of having to like either scrap your idea or completely revamp it. Or they say, and even so, there's the element too where you could just say, hey, we have this idea that we want to do, and they go, oh, I love that idea, it sounds great, go for it. Don't let them off the hook at that point, right? Because if you come back a few weeks later and you show them your design and they're like, whoa, that's not at all what I was thinking, right? You, everyone imagines, I'm sure y'all have seen some of those cartoons where it's like, everyone's saying the same thing, but they all have a different image in their head of what they're talking about. Um, as a UXer, as UX designers, our job is to translate that and make sure that everyone has the same picture in their head, because that allows us to all work together cohesively and produce a great product and great designs. So collaboration and communication are key things as a UX designer, and you're always going to want to bring in as wisely as many voices as you can into your process, so that you're constantly getting feedback and people are seeing what you're doing, so that by the end result everyone has already seen it and they're feeling like they're part of the team, so to speak, like they've helped design it, when true, I mean, they have to a certain extent, right? But what you're doing is you're bringing their ideas to life and kind of shaping them, and and putting the appropriate UX spin on everybody's ideas to bring them all together in one design. Um, and there's a lot of collaboration tools out there that make it a lot easier, especially Figma, which I used to not be a fan of, but I highly recommend now. It's so easy to get stakeholders' opinions because you can give them the link to your design doc and they can check in and leave comments, which is a really good way to have visibility of your design out there. Um, and then letting the stakeholders in on the beginning is even, I would say, even more important if your company doesn't really value UX, right? You want them to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's pretty much all this stuff is important. And then it's even more important if your company is kind of on the fence with UX. You just have to work even harder at it, be even more of an advocate, really know your stuff, do some research, and be able to defend why you're doing what you're doing. Um, those are kind of the big things, especially when you're working on projects, to remember. Um, and I'm going to open it up to questions now, and then I'll answer some of the pre-written questions. But did anybody have any questions or thoughts on this, on what I've just talked about? I guess you can raise your hand, or can you raise your hand or put
Yeah,
a message in chat?
there's a little reactions button, and I'd sent everyone screenshots of how to do this, but I'll say it again. You have a little reactions button, the smiley face with the plus icon right next to closed caption. If you click on that, you can see a raise hand button. So if you do have a question for Liz, please go ahead. You can use that reactions button and find the raise hand.
Yeah.
there and then do this. Liz, while everyone else is thinking of their questions, I have one quick question for you. Um, so, the point that you made about the boss is the boss, and at the end of the day, you really can't do more than what you can do. Like, you can convince somebody to an extent, but if they're the boss, then you kind of have to sit back.
Yep.
Doesn't that become really hard if you can see that you do have the best answer, you do have the right solution for their problem?
Totally.
How do you kind of like, and I know you said it's not about yourself personally, but how do you sort of create that mental mindset? Like, how do you have that mindset to really distance yourself from, if you're so empathetic, you're going to feel worse that, oh, I can see
Oh,
this
for
problem and
sure.
I can see a solution. So how would you tackle that?
For sure. Yeah. So there's actually a company that I contracted at, and my boss didn't believe in user research, which was just baffling. It still baffles me to this day. Um, and I would bring it up, and because we'd be looking at a project and building out a whole new feature, and then I would say, well, let's do some research. Let's just kind of pick people's brains. Let's talk to some customers, see if they really need this or if they want this. And he was convinced. He's like, you can't talk to a customer unless you have a design. I was like, I don't think that's true. And this was partly like in my younger part of the career, so I was kind of like, is that true? Like, I don't really, I don't know. That doesn't seem right. Um, and he wasn't right. It's not right. You do not need to have a design to talk to your customer, just to be clear. And that's, side note, is really helpful to have a mentor during these times, because there's not going to be a Medium article that specifically says, no, you do not need a design to be able to talk to users. It's really helpful to have a mentor to just go to and ask these random questions to. But how I handled that situation is that I continually brought it up in as respectful a manner as I could. Like, why don't we do some user research? And he would shoot it down every time. And eventually it did become a little frustrating. And that's kind of, it can lead to is this job the best fit for me? Right? Like, do they really value UX? And do I see a way forward
Hmm.
of changing minds, or do I see that they are just the decider of everything and they're not going to listen to people, which is just like generally a separate issue of what kind of work environment do you want to be in,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
And I definitely lost some of my drive for doing the product and designing it, because I was just fully guessing at what the user wanted, which just really isn't very fun. um, and it created a lot of over design and overwork.
Mhm.
So I think that had it been a different case, just continually advocating for it would have worked really well. And
Mhm.
this was the one-off case where he was really stubborn and was like, absolutely not, and was getting like angry with me for bringing it up. Um, and that's where I was kind of like, okay, well, I'll just go find a different job.
Right.
Uh,
And
but yeah, just keep advocating and know your stuff, and find a mentor if you're unsure, just to double check yourself. You never want to defend something to the death and be wrong. That's just the worst.
that would be really awful. I think we
Yeah.
have one raised hand here, I believe. Jennifer, if I'm not mistaken, ask your question.
Yes. Kind of on what you were just talking about. My question is there a way to find like little hints in the job interview process or in the application process of if you're applying for a company that actually values UX, just so you can get
Right.
uh, like an idea before you jump in and, like you said, completely taken away and baffled in the middle of it all.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. So some things that I have done. One of the things that I first ask is, how long have you had a UX department? Right. If they are like, oh, we're just putting it together, it isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? If they're just putting it together, then you get to be on the ground floor and help them do stuff and build out what the UX department should be. Um, but if they're bringing on a junior designer, let's say, and they don't have a head UX person or anything like that, and you're going to be under the development team or under some other team, um, it might be a little wary, and I'd ask more probing questions like, what do you expect from this role? How much of a say am I going to have? What do you think of, user research and the time that it takes to do that? What's the turnaround time that you expect? I've worked for companies and they're like, yeah, we have a turnaround time for design that's like 2 weeks. It's like, that doesn't work. Like it's not okay. And I understand if we need to like slowly work up to more time to fit, we can't change things overnight, but seeing if they're flexible on things um, is really important. And I've worked for some companies that are like, yeah, I understand 2 weeks is too small. We will totally work up to a month, which is great. And that's what we were able to do over a year time, work up to a month of design time. But asking those questions in the beginning is always a good idea. And they, let's see, they're probably, most of the companies that I've applied for, except for the bigger companies, they're definitely more of like we want a UX designer, but then when you read the description, it's really, they just want like someone to do literally everything. They want the research, they want the UX, they want the UI, which isn't a bad thing, right? And it gives you the ability to hone your skills, which is what I did. And you kind of have to know going in, and this just has to do with the whole, which I had to have a lot of coaching on, having the confidence in the job interview to just say, yes, I can do this, right? And maybe you really can't do it, or maybe it's not your favorite thing. Like UI design is not my strength, but I know I can do it. It just takes extra effort, but it may not be the best, but I'm not going to tell them that. I'm just like, yes, I can totally do UI design and it's going to be great. Because most of the time they don't know better, which works out fine. But that is kind of a question to ask regarding UX, what do they expect? Red flags for me, when I see a UX designer thing and they're saying that they want me to do marketing materials, or they want me to do Photoshop stuff, or they want me to do like Illustrator stuff for sales. Those are kind of red flags, and like they're not looking for a UX designer. Yeah, they're looking for a designer to do everything. Which if that's
unicorn,
what you want to
right?
do,
That's what
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what you want to do, then great. Like if you love having your hands in everything, go for it. But those are some things that are red flags that I've seen in the past to be careful about. I hope that somehow hit on some of your question, Jennifer.
It did, thanks. I just finished school and I'm now taking that jump into the career search. So I just wanted to have an idea. Thank you.
Totally. Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think we have Sarah as well. She's raised a hand, has a question. Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Hi, thanks for sharing. I appreciate your speaking to the them wanting everything in one designer. And I'm in the same situation as Jennifer is, just starting to look. So I guess my question maybe is a silly question, because if you're in a position where you can't do any research, what can you do? Like, how do you get user feedback without speaking to a user? Is there like a secret way? I mean, aside from not finding yourself in that role in the first place.
Right. So one thing that you can do is, as the saying goes, great artists steal. So you are going to want to go out and find as many comparable products as you can. And especially if they're larger, assume that they've done user research and take what they're doing. And just base it off of that. I've done that before. There's some really big companies that were like, oh, well, Salesforce did this, and I'm positive they did user research. So we're going to steal this methodology for doing something, or, this flow for doing something. And I feel like I was in a very unique case of someone just being like, absolutely no user research. There's so many cheap ways to do user research. There's a really good book called, think it's called UX Team of One. Yes. Yeah, the User Experience Team of One by Leah Bully. And I highly recommend it in that she's got some chapter or a few chapters in there about like bare necessity user research stuff. So it's like put a Google forms together and get some emails of some people, even if maybe they're not the real customers, but if you've done a user persona, then you can kind of like guess who the customer would be, right? Find some friends, whatever. It's totally free, which usually when you tell the company, I need to do some user research and it's free, they're like, okay, fine, whatever, you do you. So using those forms or just hopping on a call as well with a customer, if you can get that customer voice, which that's the only company I haven't ever been able to get a customer on the phone, because usually customers want, to have a voice in the product and a say in what's going to be the next thing. So I would say more often than not, you're going to be able to find somebody. But doing those cheap, easy things is a really good way if your company isn't huge on UX to say, hey, I just need to hop on a phone call with a client or a customer and talk to sales to find one of those. Or I just need to send out a survey and talk to sales to get some emails that you can send stuff out to. And whenever you're doing any of these emails or anything, or you do a phone call, I always like to say, this is a one-time survey, but if you would like to give feedback in the future, please let me know, because I would like to make you part of this exclusive group of people who give, you make it sound really fancy, but it's really nothing. It's just, someone that you get to go to. But I've done that before and I get a lot of good feedback on people who are like, oh yes, I'd love to be in this exclusive feedback group that, is the first to go to and to see all the new stuff. Is another trick to get people to stick with you. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for your question. I don't see any more raised hands, Liz. So
yeah, I don't know if anybody else, it doesn't have to be a question, a topic of conversation or anything. This is a small enough group where we can kind of chat just a bit if there's anything else that's on y'all's minds.
not seeing anyone else's.
Sarah, did you raise your hand again?
Oh, okay. Let me unmute you. All right, Sarah, you can unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. So for those starting out, what's the difference between a junior designer and just a regular designer? Is it advisable to go into a more supported role as a junior designer, or can people just jump right in?
It's a good question. Advisable. What's advisable? I think it's really, it caters more towards your personality. If you are confident, and even if you're not, so I say that in that I was not confident in diving into a startup. I just was kind of like, well, I guess I'll figure it out on the way and hope that I don't screw up too much. But I was definitely nervous and tons of imposter syndrome, right? I still have imposter syndrome with any job. I'm like, I can't believe you're calling me a senior, and I can't believe you're paying me this much to do this, and I can't believe you believe what I'm saying. But they do. So confidence is a key part of faking it till you make it.
Delivering it. So Liz, you're being very humble. I mean, you've got so many years. So yeah, but I can understand the imposter syndrome. I guess we all feel it, but you've got credibility behind you. So
yeah, I just want you to know, no matter how far you get in the field, you're always going to feel a little bit of imposter syndrome when you come to a new company.
Valid.
So I think it depends on your personality, right? If you want to have that more of that mentorship, which is something that I truly wanted, I never really have had working at a company of having an experienced UX designer built into the job, right? I've had to go out and find my mentors on the side versus every day I go to work and I have an experienced UX designer who is, very interested in my growth and me learning and nurturing my knowledge base so that I can become a more proficient designer. That is something great. And if you find an opportunity like that, like jump all over it. Even if maybe the product isn't super exciting or the company isn't super exciting, if you're in an interview and you realize that you're being interviewed by a UX designer at that company who is intrigued in you and interested in you and wants you to succeed, it is an awesome opportunity, and totally take it, because it is going to boost you way farther than just like learning on your own, slowly stumbling through things like I did. But also, I mean, at the end of the day, you need a job. So don't be afraid to take a job if it kind of feels out of your comfort zone. Remember, if they offer you the job, they've interviewed other people and they think you're the best candidate. So go with it and just be confident and read Medium articles anytime you're not sure.
Yeah. I like what you said though about the mentor doesn't have to be under the same roof. Like you could have a mentor that is supporting you on the side. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Sarah. We also have Heather here, I think.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, I was on my phone and it wasn't letting me ask questions. So I was like, oh, I'm on here twice. Bad UX, ha. But I have a problem where I have a customer that really, really needs my help, and I'm freelance. And it's an automobile telemetry company. I've sent them a estimate on how long it would take to rehaul their interface and some other information about that. And he kind of just was like, we don't have time for that. And I heard you say something about phases.
Yep.
And that being a good way to like ease people into getting something done, because right now it's kind of a brick wall. He's like, oh, we need to spend time on hardware. We don't have time for software.
Right.
So how do phases work, and how might I apply that in this situation?
For sure. So phases are great. First phase is you want to find all those easy wins, right? What are the stuff that doesn't take a lot of time, but it gets the ball rolling on a revamp? And stuff too that, right? Because sometimes while phases are beautiful and a lot of times it leads to finishing the rest of the phases, sometimes it doesn't either. And sometimes phase one is it. And they're like, I feel like this is good. So you want to balance that phase one, right? Of what's really needed and what can you do that's going to make the biggest impact for the least amount of effort, and maybe throw in like one big impact, big effort thing, which they may knock out. Right. But when it comes to a whole overhaul, a lot of the fun stuff gets kicked out when you're like, oh, well, I'd love to redo the whole branding. And I think that, half these colors aren't accessible. And I think that the whole spacing and the look and the feel should be changed. That's usually, sadly, that's the fun stuff, but that's the stuff that gets kicked to the curb. And it's easier, it's harder to defend those things too, right? It's harder to be like, we did all this user research and these colors are way better than the other ones, because it's kind of a feel thing. It's like, well, some people thought these colors were better, yada, yada. But fixing forms or inputs or readability, or being able to find information on a website, those are things that you can put hard data behind, right? You can have people test things out and say, people with website A, they could not find this information when given a task. Website B, they could find this information when given a task. And those are really good things to be able to showcase the benefits of it. So break out what, at bare minimum, if they said, hey, we can do an update, but it has to be super minimal, what would you absolutely want to be updated? Like if if you could only pick a few things. And that's usually the phase one. Like if you could only do one thing and everything else could never be done again, what would that be?
Okay.
And then start adding some things onto the phase two and the phase three. The phase three is usually the most fun thing, where you're like, revamp it all and make it all beautiful and amazing.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah. Does
Um,
that help?
Yeah, it kind of seems like what he had in mind when we first started talking was, oh, I just need like a one pass of UX on this site that's never had any UX ever. So I don't exactly know how to do that other than going to a straight rehaul where, you know, he doesn't have personas, he has nothing.
Right, right. Start simple, bring in more jargon later, you know, fix the little things. Usually it's like, let's make sure all the buttons look the same, right? Let's make sure they all have the same rounded corners or square corners, and let's make sure that there's like consistent spacing in things, which helps with readability. And let's make sure the forms work well, and that the information hierarchy is good, right? That's another key thing, because information hierarchy is good. People can find stuff within the website, and those are kind of some core elements that help just kind of boost it without doing a lot of work.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thanks for your question, Heather. So we're almost coming up to nearly 40 minutes, and I'm pretty sure Zoom's going to kick us out soon. But I think some of the questions submitted kind of are running parallel to what people have asked here. Liz, what do you think? Is there anything else that?
Yeah, I think that they are pretty much, what question could I ask in an interview to find out company values UX, and which we hit on, and then, you know, fair expectations for a UX designer when you're reading through the
Job description.
the job description,
Yeah.
which I think we hit on as well. So
yeah. All right. So I think with that, I'm actually going to perhaps say that we're getting close to ending the meeting, but I really want to thank you, Liz. I so appreciate this. You've been fantastic help here for me and for everybody else present.
yeah, happy to hop on.